So the next storyteller is Nick Blakesley. Is that right? Nick Blakesley? And then, hey, we need more stories, so start filling that lantern.
That's right, Alming Tong.
Hello. Let me start, before I actually get into the story, let me just tell you all, for the record, I'm not a violent person. That has less to do with the fact that I don't like violence anymore, because if I was a violent person, I wouldn't be for very long, because there's a lot of bigger people on this planet than I am. But as we all know, there are people on this world that can drive anyone to violence. And for me, it was in the 4th grade on the playground of Stafford Elementary when I fell from grace and would eventually become suspended for the first and only time in my child life. But before we get there, we actually have to start a week beforehand. I was visiting my uncle with my family, and my uncle is a really, how do I say, a fascinating person. He's someone that has a lot of talents. He can fix just about anything you give him, but all of his talents are overshadowed by the fact that, well, let's just say he's really good at swearing. The guy can put together sentences comprised literally 100% of swear words and still maintain grammatical accuracy. I'm confident you could put this in front of a New York Times editor and they would say, well, it's not exactly appropriate, but it does make sense. And so as a 4th grade child who grew up in a Christian household before the internet was ever a thing, I did everything in my power to hang out near my uncle as much as possible. And so one day I was hanging out outside of his garage where he did most of his work, and a loud crash happened, which signified that something terrible was about to escape from my uncle's lips, and sure enough, it did. And after he'd finished, I poked my head in the doorway in the exact moment that he turned to look that direction. And we made eye contact and had a brief moment of, oh shit, we've just been caught. And he said, did you hear all of that? And I said, yes, I did. What did you mean by a real piece of shit? And he looked down at the engine in front of him that he was working on, and he said, well, Nick, a real piece of shit is when something is being a fucking asshole, and then went off on another tirade altogether as if the word asshole was a Pavlovian signal. And again, after he'd finished, he looked at me and said, okay, here's the deal, Nick. We don't repeat this to anyone. These are adult words that adults use when they're frustrated and they don't know how to convey their emotions. Do you understand? And I said, yes. And he said, don't tell your mother. And I said, that's just fine, because my mother ran a very strict household. We didn't so much as have a swearing jar as we had a swearing coffin, one that my mother would put you in if she found out you were cursing. And so after spring break, I went back to school and started the final stretch of my 4th grade year. And the 4th grade was really interesting for me. I learned a lot about myself. I think it's a formative year for kids, to be honest. I learned that I hated math. I still do hate math. I learned that I loved football. And I learned that I was pretty small, and I had a really compact body that could fit in small places like garbage cans, for example. It was the first year I got my very own bully. Yeah, I don't remember signing up for that, but I got it regardless. And his name was Travis. And let me tell you that God really broke the mold when he came up with Travis. If you could somehow mix Stalin, Hitler, Mao Zedong, and Pol Pot, you might have someone incredibly close to Travis, but not quite, because he's the type of person that would meticulously plan weeks in advance. He was the type of bully that could convince teachers we were friends, so we would sit together, and then he'd poke me with pencils and pull my hair and give me wet willies and all that really fun stuff. But like every other bully on this planet, he's someone that can tell what someone is most self-conscious about. And for me, of course, it was my small size, but it was twofold. It was my small size and my teeth, because I had lost all of my baby teeth and grown in just my 2 front teeth, creating a wonderful imagery of what the human would look like if you mixed it with the genome of maybe some tree-dwelling rodents. And so he would call me things like Bucktooth Blakesley and Beaver Face. But his favorite thing to do was to lovingly describe my teeth as my pair of barn doors, because they were that big. And so it's no surprise that it came all to a head eventually. We were on the playground on Friday. It was the final recess. And I had somehow managed to avoid Travis the entire week. Took some considerable sleuthing on my part. And we were under the cover because it was, of course, raining, and a foot went out and tripped me to the ground. And before I could get up, someone tore the hat off my head, and I turned around, and of course, it's Travis sitting there with his goon squad of bullies. And I don't know if it was the entire year that had come to a head, or if it was because I had finally figured out that I hated this guy, or because I had finally found my voice, but I told Travis, I said, "You better give that back." And he looked at me and said, "Yeah, well, what are you going to do about it?" Now, there's an unwritten code and conduct to the playground. Certain phrases might mean something to a normal, rational, thinking human being, but mean something completely different to a child. For example, the phrase, "You can have it when I'm done with it," is the playground equivalent of "You can pry this from my cold dead hands, you son of a bitch." In the same regard, "Yeah, what are you going to do about it?" is saying, "Give me your best shot." It's ushering in total war. It's saying all is permitted and nothing is forbidden. And as if to punctuate that point, Travis took my hat by both hands and tore and ripped it in two. Now, to say I wanted to wrap my fingers around his neck and squeeze until the life slowly faded from his eyes would be putting it mildly. In fact, I had almost no tools at my disposal. I was not big, like I said. I didn't have a gaggle of large friends. But I did have two tools at my disposal. And so I grabbed Travis by the forearm, the same way you might grab a corn on the cob or leg of turkey. And I bit down as hard as I could. As hard as I could. Yeah. Now, he was wearing a windbreaker, two sweatshirts, and a long sleeve t-shirt. If he was wearing chainmail, I don't think it would have helped him. I not only bit through all of it, but I bit through his skin as well. He started bleeding almost immediately. He screamed like a little schoolgirl, or prepubescent boy. They're pretty similar. And he actually had to go to the hospital to get stitches. That's how dangerous these barn doors are. Yeah, I was taken to the counselor's office. A really sweet woman, really quirky. Her name was Mrs. Hardish. Her clothing looked like it was stitched together with her cat's discarded fur. Like, that's the type of person she was. She would have fit in great in Ashland. And she was someone that was really sensitive, really emotional. And she was the last person I wanted to let down. And so the first thing I said when I walked through the doorway was, "Are you going to suspend me?" Because that's like the childhood equivalent of being condemned to hell. And she said, "Well, that is yet to be determined. Why did you bite Travis?" And I started to tell her everything. I started to talk from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. I talked about him tripping me, about the names, about my barn doors. She was really confused about that. I talked about everything, about my hat, and I realized even in the 4th grade, I was making absolutely no sense. I was rambling because I was so flustered. I was so angry, and I didn't have the words to express myself. And then, in a moment of clarity, or insanity, I still don't know, I said, "You know what, actually, frankly, Miss Hardish, Travis was being a real piece of shit." Thank you.